This is the Hidden Roles Podcast. By Dungeon Masters, for Dungeon Masters. We are going to give you a peek on our side of the table so you can see inside our notebooks and what we've been doing on our side of the screen. Now, let me roll my d20. Okay, check my table. And my guest this week is...
Hello, my name is Rick and I run Dungeons & Dragons and Dungeons & Dragons for Kids.
Now, fair warning. If you are a player in any of my games or in
Rick's
games, and you listen to this, nice characters you've got there. Be a shame if something happened to them. All right, so my guest today is Rick from Vechel Ventures. Am I saying that right? Is it Vechel? Vechel?
Yeah, it's a Dutch name, so Vechel is the most
Vechel.
thing I think that's the best pronunciation of it, but then again, this is a really Dutch name, so I don't really mind if it's just a new form over the seas. No problem at all.
Well, listen, I want to try to get it right. So we're going to do the rapid fire version, or the rapid fire questions now, so we can get into this. This is the getting to know you part. So we already said what your name is, Rick. What is, we said the name of the game. Well, you run D&D games. Do you have you said D&D for kids. So what is that? Is that do you have a specific thing you're running or?
A few years back, a school asked me to work out something that would help kids to get more into reading. And the thing that got me into reading were games. And computer games in the first part, like Final Fantasy, but later also Dungeons & Dragons. So I just stripped D&D of most of its content, and I've recreated a game called the Adventure Handbook, at least in Dutch, Avonturen Handboek. And I've been using that to help kids get into reading and building their own stories for about 2 years now.
Oh, that's very cool. So you basically you took what's already existing and you just stripped it down and made it a little bit easier to their grade level, or?
No, the D&D, I started with 3rd edition, and that's a bulk of a game.
Yes.
And we already have 5th edition, but it's a lot more easy to get into.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still a lot for kids, especially when you have to do it in Dutch, because I work with kids ages 6 and up.
Mm-hmm.
So the language barrier was one thing, but also just the magnitude of the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to the SRD, the open gaming part of D&D. I was like, okay, what is the essence of D&D? And it comes down to 3 steps. A game master tells you what you're seeing or where you are. A player says, this is what I want to do. And a dice tells you if you succeed or miserably fail.
Mm-hmm.
And these 3 steps is just what I've started building again to bring a more child-friendly version.
Okay.
But also as a stepping stone for the future geeks, because let's be honest, if these kids become 13 and they have some more English knowledge, get the player's handbook, get to playing.
There you go. So there's not a translated version into Dutch?
No, it never was.
Really?
At least, if I remember correctly, there was a translated one of the 2nd edition, the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, I was born in 1989, and I was too late for that version. So I have no active memory of that even existing.
I actually find that shocking. I thought they would have done that. But, well, to that end, what was the first tabletop role-playing game that you ever played?
I think it really was D&D.
Mm-hmm.
I was 13 years old. A friend of mine came back from a convention with his dad, and his dad was a great Warhammer fan.
Okay.
And he brought along the 3rd edition starter box from Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition.
Mm-hmm.
And he came home with it and was like, but this isn't a wargaming thing. I don't like this. So he gave it to his son. And he got a group of friends, including me, around the table. And we started playing D&D.
Okay. So is that 3rd edition for you, or is that 3.5?
Yeah, that was 3rd edition.
Okay.
Half a year later, 3.5 came out. So then we switched to 3.5. We didn't have the books, so it was just, there's a new version. We'll get these books.
So yeah, I started with 2nd edition, and I think I might have played a couple games in 3rd edition and not even realized it, but the more I hear about 3rd edition, it's like, man, that seems to have gotten really bogged down with
it really got out of hand. With more than 500 books that you could choose your options from.
Oh, my Lord.
And you could... things stacked very easily in 3rd edition. So you could have an armor class of over 70 by reaching level 5.
Jeez.
Every level 8 and up wizard and cleric were just the ones that could change the world. And fighters were only there for their HP, I guess.
Oh.
So it was a real weird balance if you came to 3rd edition. Also, dethroning gods. 3.5 had your back. In 5th, no. You'll be annihilated.
Yeah.
As it should be.
Yeah, exactly. It should be a little bit of a challenge. I remember in 2nd edition, they did have something with once you reached level 20, like then it was becoming a quest for immortality, and you were trying to become a god, and there was a whole thing that you were supposed to do, and I just never got that far into it because it just seemed like so much.
Yeah, the scopes get really lot bigger, and especially now 5th edition. Most campaigns run to level 8 to 10. It doesn't get any higher than that anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because then it starts getting very overpowered, and it can become a little unwieldy to keep the game challenging for people. So is D&D your favorite, or do you have another favored system that you like to use?
I've also played some Call of Cthulhu and Mage Ascension, as well as a few games, but very few of Vampire the Masquerade. But D&D was my first and foremost love, and I stick to that for a lot. I also knew that one the best, so it was easiest just to make sure that I could fully focus on that one. At least as a dungeon master. As a player, I enjoy a lot of games, but I usually mostly enjoy the aesthetics of a game. I like gritty parts. I like horror stuff.
Okay.
And D&D is not really the suitable game for that, at least not from a lot of players' perspectives.
Yeah.
So if I can get into a Call of Cthulhu game, I'm there. I'm happy.
Okay. So how did you end up making the transition to being behind the screen from being a player to being the person running the game?
The ambition to play more is to blame. Well, we had a group of friends. I was like 13, 14 years old. And I want to play more often, but life got in the way. People got to different schools and everything. So I just wanted to play more. And yeah, there's one thing you need to play, and that's Dungeon Master. So we had players, but no Dungeon Master. So then I'll do it. And I kind of rolled into that, starting with age 15, I think.
Okay.
Around that age is where I started Dungeon Master, with a few very bad examples in the beginning. But I got better along the way, I hope.
Listen. I think back to some of my first campaigns, and God, they were terrible. Because you don't know, and we didn't have such good examples now that we had. We didn't have. You can go onto YouTube and you can find any number of people that are running fantastic games. Like, oh, these are good things. Back then, you just sort of had to figure it out yourself, and yeah. What is your favorite monster as a DM? What is your favorite monster? Doesn't have to be one to throw at them. Just something you just like.
Hobgoblins.
Hobgoblins. Why hobgoblins?
Yes. Because they're smart.
Okay.
A lot of people think of hobgoblins like just the bigger goblins and just below the orcs. But if you dive into the lore of the hobgoblins, there's a lot of tactical work. There's a lot of knowledge amongst this race that nobody really seems to really care or know about. There's even a campaign setting called Kingdom of Skalamar. That centers a huge hobgoblin kingdom, and I love that part. I also love to surprise my players with it. And of course, it's a low-level enemy, at least in its basic form. So you can also work with, for example, to create generals, or you can just make them level as the level progress as the party does, to also keep them challenging. That's
interesting.
An awesome thing to work with.
Oh, that's a pretty cool idea. So it almost sounds like something like what was that? The Lord of the Rings Shadow of Mordor game, where you had the Nemesis System, where like certain some of the orcs would actually level up with you.
Yeah,
I love
that part. Also, usually I have a few players in my groups that are also dungeon masters or have very casually read the monster manual.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually do a lot of reskinning and reflavoring just to keep them on their toes.
That's a
because
good
I know
idea.
that some of them, they know what they're fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And even they say they won't, or they won't let that knowledge flow into the character. It will. Absolutely will. So if my party now level 9 is my current highest level party,
Mm-hmm.
If they see a hobgoblin, they know that isn't a 1d8 hobgoblin.
I like it.
It keeps them on their toes, and I love playing with that, especially with the low level monsters.
That's right there. That's a really great tip for people, just to, because you always hear that. How do you keep the game fresh? How do you keep your players challenged? Well, level up the low-level monsters. Who says that only the characters are allowed to get stronger, And
Yeah, true.
I like that. And that's for for the folks that are deciding that they're going to peruse the monster manual. Do you ever... do your players have the monster manual at the table, or do they do you the courtesy of not looking it up while they're playing the game?
They say they do, but I'm pretty sure that some of them are browsing D&D Beyond or using their phones. So I'm pretty sure that most of them will tell me to my face that they have not looked it up.
Mm-hmm.
But at least one of them honestly says, "I've looked it up, and you're not doing it like the monster manual says." And he stopped saying that because he now knows that I've always been trying to surprise the parties.
Uh-huh.
For example, also, I can also use a frost giant, for example, only make it with the Dungeon Master Guide into a medium character, and that's a great magical hobgoblin.
Oh, that's a really good idea.
That's the most easiest part for any Dungeon Master here to easily make a new monster, because making a balanced monster is hard.
Yeah.
The Dungeon Masters from the Wizard of the Coast did a lot of trouble making all these monsters for you, so reskin them for a part. That works perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah, that way you don't have to worry about, it's got too many hit points or it's doing way too much damage. It's just...
Exactly.
Yeah, I like it. That's a really good idea. All right, so
players.
So now we're going to take a little bit well, we've already started to get a little peek behind your screen. Let's go a little bit deeper. So when you start a brand new game, I'd be curious as to what you do with the kids as well. What do you do with your session 0? What do you do? Like, what are some of the questions that you ask of your players? What is the information you need when you conduct your session 0, however that looks, in preparation for a new campaign?
That depends on a few things. First of all, as a Dungeon Master, if you're starting with, we're going to play this campaign, or guys, we have this world, and we're going to create an adventure together. Because if a player made a character with an enormous background story, and, for example, he went to a very, very happy-go-lucky guy, and we're going to play, for example, Strahd's game. There's no happy in Strahd.
There is no happy in Strahd.
So, first of all, the first is to because what are we going to do? Are we going to create a game surrounding your backstories, and then how we're going to make those? Or going to start with, we're going to want to run this campaign, Storming Thunder, whatever. So that's at least for the adult games and teenage games that I run. That's the first question. Then you especially also come with, okay, what do you guys want to? What kind of level, for example, in high fantasy to low fantasy do you want? How technologically advanced do you want to play? From sci-fi to Lord of the Rings. So what kind of game do you guys want? What kind of feel? And then we can start with the character creation part. So everyone gets an equal place at the table from the same perspective. That's at least what I really find important, because I really like to have that story shine. And the story shines easier when the parts that are in that story feel natural into that one.
Yeah.
So that's most part how I run the D&D games from that point. Then again, if I run a Strahd, then usually there are some restrictions already in place. What can you play? What can't you play? And I say, guys, this is your framework. Tell them what you got, and let's get this on. And if I run D&D with kids, on the other hand, usually I just start with, what kind of hero do you want to be?
Okay, yeah.
And I have a few small classes worked out for them. For example, the warrior. But I don't really care if it's soldier or a Viking or a knight. They have the same backbone.
Yeah.
But then again, flavor is the key word over there, because also have a lot less armor and weapon options, at least not statted ones.
Mm-hmm.
For example, every axe, every sword does the same amount of damage. So it's very easy to not optimize, but just be like, this is a cool guy, this is what I'm going to play, let's do this.
So that's just to make it a little bit easier for the kids?
Not easier, but I want them to just go nuts in their creativity.
Okay.
No power building.
Right.
If you're 8 years old, just just get playing.
Right.
So I really want them to get out of that analytic zone and more into just the creative, fun part of D&D.
Okay.
So you can easily have a group, for example, with kids that has a soldier in it, and a ninja, and a knight, and a Viking, and a princess, and they together go on their most awesome stories. And I usually try to base my children's stories on children's literature. So they also, if they love a story, for example, they can dive into it by reading a book.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
Yeah, that's also the educational part of me that runs these games.
So let me ask you this, because this is something that I've run into when, especially I have two groups that are brand new to D&D. One group we've played 2 or 3 times, maybe 4 times already, and the other group I introduced them about a month ago to D&D for the very first time. And one of the challenges I always run into is when you get to the spellcasters and just the sheer overload, even at level 1 of the spells.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with that with kids? Because if you're, I mean, I understand what you're saying with the weapons. Yeah, it's like, oh, they're going to optimize everything. But so do you do the same thing with the spell list? Do you really pare it down, or how do you handle that?
Well, if I, for example, do an introduction game, if it's for adults, teens, or kids, doesn't really matter. I usually, I only ask them, okay, what kind of race do you think is cool?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of class do you want to be? In that class, for example, for D&D, I use a lucid chart, is a flow chart thingy.
Mm-hmm.
And I just give them that, and I'll make sure they have their sheets. And if I start these games, I use color-coded sheets. For example, red for attack information, yellow for abilities and spells, blue for skills, and purple for HP and armor class.
Mm-hmm.
And I provide all the character sheets what they need. And also at the beginning, the first few spells. And I usually then pick out a few spells that give a little bit of a feel of the different possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
We have the Firebolt, we have the Mage Hand, we have the Minor Illusion. Just to give them a few examples of what magic can do.
Okay.
And that's just so we can get the start going, that they understand, okay, this is how the mechanics work.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's time to turn this character really into my own. And then we get to book, and now we make our character version 2. That's how I usually do it. Also with the kids, also with adults, doesn't really matter in that regard. But I really want people to just enjoy their first character. It has to be something that they think, yeah, I'm that and I'm cool. That's the most important part for me, at least as a dungeon master. Also, my first character, oh man, a dwarven cleric of Moradin, and I just saw him as a paladin. I was constantly running into combat, getting my ass kicked, and my dice never really agreed with that character. He was level 6, and his Warhammer was as good as new. If I hit 3 people in total in all these adventures, I think that's a lot. But I still love that character. I love my Eric the Cleric. I really love him still, because I just was so enthusiastic about who I've created. And also when it comes to your first character, it's probably never the best that you've ever created, because you're not sure what the rules are and how it all works.
Yeah.
So the most important part is have fun, have a cool one, so you at least never feel bummed by your character.
Yeah. I like that. See, I might adopt some of this stuff. See, every time I do this podcast, I learn such cool ideas. This is so awesome. So what do you do to plan a session? Are you someone who has like copious notes, or are you pretty much flying by the seat of your pants? Are you somewhere in between? Like, what's your planning process? What do you go into a session with?
First of all, it depends on the party that I'm playing with.
Right.
Because some of them are just unhinged. And that's the most kind way I can describe it. Usually, for example, if I run a module, I just know, okay, this is the module, and I'll pick up the Forgotten Realms wiki and make sure to have some more information about the area.
Mm-hmm.
Because it all depends on where the characters want to go. I usually translate it as there is a storyline, but the camera is on you guys,
Mm-hmm.
and the world is constantly doing stuff, but the camera is following you guys,
Mm-hmm.
and it's up to you guys to see where that camera goes. You're gonna get information, or you're just going la 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 to the north, not knowing what there might be. And I think a lot of Dungeon Masters will now be like, yeah, I know these people. Yes.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on what the party does, but I usually make sure that at least I know what the world is doing, what is going on in the world, and just have them play around in that world. That's what I usually try to do if it comes to my preparational part. So usually within, depending on how high their level is and how easily they can travel, I have at least 60 miles of information about the region ready.
Okay.
With some random encounters as well, depending on the area, just to make sure that I always have something up my sleeve if whatever they're gonna do. Then again, if they're really into a dungeon, for example, then just to make sure that I know every corner of that dungeon, I can only be surprised by the amazing and batshit crazy ideas my players can come up with, and that's perfect.
Yes.
So that's usually my preparation part. Know the world, know what's revolving in there, and just follow the players around.
Okay, I like that too. Yeah, I think when I first got back into DMing about 4 years ago, I'd taken a lengthy break from doing any kind of TTRPG, and I way overplanned the first session. And I was like, all right, I'm going to plan for every possible thing that the players could decide to do with their characters, so I know exactly how to react. Because in my head, I was running it like a module, where the module was like, oh, if they do this, that you have this little sound bite, or you have this sound bite. And sure enough, 5 minutes into the game, all of that got turned on its ear because they did the one thing that I didn't plan for, and I learned my lesson. You can't plan for the players.
Sadly, no. They'll just always be on their way, and if you have a party that really needs that part, like for example, I have some PC gamers that are usually just they're more used to Skyrim, for example.
Mm-hmm.
One NPC will tell them, "This is what you got to do. Have fun with it."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, that's one part of it, and some people actually thrive with that approach.
Yeah.
And yeah, sure, if they need that, that's up to them. But especially the overplanning part. Even with the group that I'm streaming now, every Tuesday I run the Wanderers. I've planned way too much for them. Even now, we're playing now on stream session 50 this tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been playing now for at least a year before we got into the stream, and I still have stuff prepared for my first few sessions that they haven't figured out yet. And yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
I'll just make sure to put that in my folder of things that I might actually can use somewhere else in the future. But it's also the more the fun part. Maybe also ask the question back: are you a DM that over prepares, or one that has to take frantically a lot of notes after a session? Because the more you improvise, the more you get a note after the session. Is my experience.
Yeah, That's a really good question. I'm trying to think about that now. So I kind of do both. So I don't really plan the session the same ways that I used to. So what I do now is I have a list of NPCs that I anticipate that they'll be based on what their actions have been. I have a list of NPCs that they might be interacting with, and if they've interacted with them before, I'll have some notes on them. And I basically write out like 5 scenes that I'll present them with, and usually they only get to like 2 or 3 of them, but basically not even written, but have like the 5 acts for them to go through in a session.
Oh, cool.
And just some brief notes, because I know that they could, the second they interact with that, they could completely turn it on its ear, and like you said, the batshit stuff they come up with, it's like, well, I couldn't anticipate that, so I don't try to plan more than just what that is. In the new game, the new campaign I'm running, it's in a homebrew setting, so I've been doing a lot of writing on my end, but I'm just as like world building, but I'm finding that for me, it's more just, it's a fun writing exercise, and it's like you said, the world is still moving around. The camera just happens to be on the characters. So yeah, I've got a whole bunch of like notes of stuff that I know that they're probably never going to see. I hope that I can reveal some of this stuff to them at some point, but for me, it's been more just about kind of like you said, understanding how the world works. So so when they encounter something that I wasn't expecting them to encounter, I at least have some background. Like, oh, well, yeah, this is the way things work here, so this is probably what would happen. And most of the session is me flying by the seat of my pants, trying to make it look like I knew what I was doing the entire time.
Yeah, true. I can fully empathize with that part. So yeah, exactly that. I'm usually, depending on the campaign, one that really gives my players the freedom of, this is your sandbox, going on an adventure. And afterwards, and that's also my DM shutting off protocol, just to make sure all the notes are organized, so I won't forget the details in the next session.
Yep.
Because I'll probably forget an NPC or two. That'll just happen. Just to make sure that I have everything lined up for the next sessions. But also something just to get my head out of the game afterwards, so that you can really fun ritual. Yeah.
I started doing a write-up after the games, kind of like depending on my level of energy, either as like a full like short story, kind of making a third-person narrative, or at least some notes that I post. I started like a subreddit for our game, and we have a wiki on there, and I've been putting those notes on there so they can refer to it as well.
Cool.
And I'm also doing it because in our last campaign, I went nuts with the NPCs. And we had way too many. Not to the point where the game wasn't fun, but I never got a chance to really develop many of them. There's one that I did get a little bit of a chance to develop, but that was on me because I wasn't keeping good enough track like that. And where I could have brought one back to play a similar role, I constantly brought someone new. It's like, oh, this character, and it got a little unwieldy. So I'm using that as a way of kind of fencing myself in as well, to kind of edit myself, so that way we can focus more on what they want to do with the game as opposed to trying to keep track of, a Tolstoy novel of characters. So
yeah, exactly that.
So I didn't put this question to you before in the notes that I sent you, but I do have a question for you. How do you deal? And I ask this specifically because you have games that you run with kids. How do you deal with character death?
Yeah, always a fun part. Well, in my games, death is always a serious possibility. And even if it comes to D&D parts, but that's also the gritty horror DM inside of me that is like, death is a no risk, no reward. So if you're on an adventure and it's just like the Pokemon franchise, for example, you just walk around. If you fail, you just lose some money and you're back on your feet.
Right.
Then I'm probably not the right DM for you. Death is a possibility, and it always should be, because that also creates a tension on the table, and also that you as a group work together to preserve all your characters, your party, your bond, your team. Death does happen in my tables, but there's always a part that they can see if they can just resurrect somebody.
Right.
Starting from level 3 and higher, I usually have one NPC that they get to know that could help them in the case if something goes wrong. Then again, it's up to the players to keep that NPC on their friendly side, but then again, that's a
good idea.
Story. I've had groups that were just trying to rob. In this case, the shrine that this cleric worked for, that didn't end well. Because especially around level 5-6, they get their resurrection spells, and that is up to them to just make the decision how to approach things. But if it comes to player death, I usually also make some room, or at least some part in the story, even if they're in overrun by monsters, there's always a little bit of room to make sure that someone has a passing end to their character. Even if you have to throw them off a cliff and you can bury them somewhere, or if you want to give them a Viking funeral in a small rowboat, there's always a small opportunity to at least give them a fitting farewell.
Right.
With the D&D for kids, I'm a lot more lenient, because they're kids.
Yeah.
And with the kids, you have the rule: if one of them survives the adventure, he can always bring back his partners. And that's a fun thing, because if, for example, I have 4 kids playing and 3 of them have their characters killed, and 1 is still on his feet, everyone is cheering him on. Everyone's like, you're the hero of this story. If you die, we all die. You can do this. And they start helping, and it really helps with the bond between these kids.
Yeah.
Then again, it also helps with the approach as a dungeon master that does this more often. I'm not sure that every kid will immediately turn to this one. But I work with these kids just so it'll make them also enthusiastic for, wait a second, if one of you survives, you all survive.
Mm-hmm.
So if he now lives, you're all good. Help him out somewhat. And then they'll just fly off the hinge, and that's perfect. And even if, for example, they don't clear whatever objective they had to follow, and he just ran away, for example, he still got away. And he still could go back to retrieve his allies, bring them back, and try again with his friends. And then again, every player then gets a vote if he wants to play a new character or try to work with the old one again.
Oh, okay.
And both are fine. Because sometimes you just get like, I want to be a ninja this week. And then 2 weeks later, I like pirates more.
Yeah.
And a week later, I've seen some show. I want to be a Viking. Sure. And usually that's fixed with just, you put on another hat and you're now a Viking.
Yep.
You learned how to sail a ship, you're good. But some kids are like, no, I wanted to play with a mage for a long time. I'm going to be a mage this time. Sure. Then we give farewell to the other adventurer. We reserve a small time slot for that as well.
Yep.
And then you start with a new character that has to introduce himself to the party and like, hello, I like to throw fireballs.
I light things on fire. Hello.
Welcome.
Yeah, it's something I've told all of my groups that I am never going to put you into a situation that is going to purposefully end in a TPK. I want them to have that trust in me that, yes, I'm going to put you in situations where your characters could die. And if you decide that you're going to do really stupid things, I can't help it if there's a TPK. If you're all level 1 players and you decide to pick a fight with the adult red dragon, it's like, so there is that, but I always try to tell them, I'm never going to say as a dungeon master, your level 1 players go fight the ancient red dragon. That's not me being fair. But yeah, and so that's been I always try to make sure they understand that. And then I said, if your character dies, let's talk.
Yeah.
Is it, like you said, is it resurrection? Is it a quest to go retrieve their soul from the underworld? Or is it roll a new character? It's a whole, that in and of itself can be an adventure. So, yeah.
It's fun. TPKs are always TPKs. If TPKs arise, usually those happen because players didn't plan anything and just went full Leroy Jenkins.
Yeah. Yes.
Or when the dice really screwed them over.
Yeah.
I've never been in a situation where a TPK occurs in a fair fight.
Right.
And that's maybe something that I also recommend to all my players. Running is a viable option.
Mm-hmm.
Even enemies that I have, for example, the goblins in Dungeons and Dragons, they even have an ability for it called Nimble Escape.
Mm-hmm.
Goblins don't want to die.
No.
Nobody wants to die. So when things get dire, these goblins will bolt the hell out of here.
Yeah.
If one of them dies in just a single blow, the rest will probably not be honor bound to help. It's like, I gotta go.
I'm out. I'm out.
So also a lot of that's fair enough. A lot of groups get frustrated by that, but also my enemies run.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they trigger traps on their way out just to give a fun chase. But I quite have a lot of enemies that just like, I don't want to die. and especially in the time where we grew up with a lot of computer games where running away is never an option.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And every monster, if it's in the 2000 Dungeon Siege or now in World of Warcraft, nobody runs. And I find that a very weird thing to experience, especially when I try to bring my more realistic games to the table.
Yeah.
I was like, he's turning around, he's running away. He can't run away. Sure he can. He has movement, he has dash. This guy is out of here.
He has legs, and he has legs, and they work.
Exactly. And that's not fair. You have a bow, have fun. You can still get them. And there's only a very rare opportunity where I get to use a teleportation spell to just give the middle finger and boom, he can be gone. But that's a very rare occurrence. But then again, it's always an option.
Mm-hmm.
And and I do understand that a lot of new players, at least in my experience, and if you see some characters, you just know this is Captain America or an anime character, and you're just like, oh no, because there's I'm not sure that a lot of people get the real introduction to D&D. I think that a lot of new players, and that's also a perfectly viable playstyle, of course, but they really go in there like, I'm the hero, I shouldn't be able to die, and whatever I do is going to be great.
Yeah.
And especially with the new 5e players, I see those more often. And it's always a fun little challenge to bring them back to to D&D.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, you have a lot of roleplay servers that that really do have that hero approach, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also a good thing to also give to new players, especially when I for example see them for one-shot nights or for introduction sessions. And it's like, okay, talk to you about this with your new dungeon master. What kind of game do you want to run? Put that in your session 0. Also, as a player, just ask the DM, okay, how is this going to go? Because I would love to play a valiant hero that just kicks ass all the time, hopefully never dies. So how hard are your games?
Yeah.
If it would ask me, I would probably say, if that's your approach, then please don't come to a campaign on my table, because you won't have a good time.
Yeah.
I will put you through the needle.
Yeah.
Through the other needle time and time again. And it will be hard. And for example, I have a group, and when we started with Assassin's Creed, they said, we'd like to do a story like Lord of the Rings. Grand, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, cool. Those are 1,200 pages in books and websites you need to read now. Cool. Fun. But along the way, they were like, no, we were kind of referring to the movie part and not the books part, because we now get a lot of, it's very hard.
Yeah.
We can't carry our objectives that easily. There's a lot at stake. No, we don't like this. It's like, please tell me next time that you want to play the movie version and not the book version. Because 2 of them were very happy with the entire book approach. Those were big Lord of the Rings fans.
Yes.
They even helped me with my preparation. If I asked them questions about certain areas, they would give me everything they knew.
Yes.
Amazing. But a few of them were like, no, I really mean the children's version. Every episode ends with a victory, and then we're off the next one.
Yeah.
Okay. That's hard. Okay. Then we have to see how we can mix this. So, for example, now we agreed upon that we're at least going to finish the story arc and then see, okay, what will be the new approach where everyone can feel validated in there, how they want to play the story. And if that means that some of them would leave the table, that's okay.
Yeah.
The most important part is that you play your game at a...
Yeah. Everyone should be having fun at the table. And
exactly. Fun is the most important part. If you're not having fun, then please don't.
What's the point? Yeah, exactly. What's the point? So So I'm thinking of like the cartoons that I grew up with, and you're about 10 years younger than me, so there's there's some overlap there, because I was still watching cartoons well into the 90s. I don't watch cartoons now. Who am I kidding?
Exactly. Well, never stopped.
But it was always, the formula was good guys win at the end, and the bad guys are in retreat saying, I'll get you next time. That was always the story. He-Man, G.I. Joe, Thundercats, all of them. They were all good guys win in the end. The story's tied up, and the bad guys always fail at their stuff. And if you look at a lot of the animation now, even animation that you could say is directly not and maybe aimed at kids, but is kid friendly. And I'm thinking specifically of Voltron that was on Netflix and the She-Ra series. Every episode did not end with the hero's victory, because they're doing serialized storytelling, which is drastically different than the episodic storytelling of the 80s and 90s. But it was okay for the bad guys to win, because I think...
See also the new He-Man story, just to put it in the same storyline.
Yeah.
we have the old He-Man.
Yeah.
Very fun to watch. I'm rewatching it right now.
That was shocking.
Yeah, and then we have the new He-Man. Like, oh wait. And I'm not going to spoil anything.
Yeah, no spoilers, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's like, wow, did not see that coming. Whoa.
I kind of choked on my cornflakes, so yeah.
Yeah, that was, but I think that's good because, one, I think it's just good storytelling, but it makes the villains that much more, I don't want to say realistic, but that much more of a actual enemy, an actual nemesis. If you know, hey, they might win. There was never any worry that Cobra Commander was going to suddenly succeed in his plans at the end of any G.I. Joe episode. There was no worries about that because every episode ended with him in defeat. But if you were to do that series now, with the way some people are telling the stories, oh wait, now he's a much more he's a bigger menace because wow, he actually is being successful. So,
of course, we're also in a different time. For example, we can binge watch the new He-Man.
Yes.
So we have the opposite approach, of course, that will, for example, every day after school I bike my ass home.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, 4:00 Pokemon.
Yep.
And I was always there every day to see a new episode where Ash kicked Rocket Team's ass.
Yep.
We're flying away, and it was all good, and everything was happy. But then again, if during that time something happened like in the storytelling now, I can fully understand that I would be a lot less happy to be at home every day.
Yeah.
For example, Gundam was also a great example because that was a big story. It only came on TV once a week.
Which one?
Let's see. Which? I only know that's a Gundam Wing.
It was back in the 90s. So yeah. Okay, that was one with
one of the few that I got here in the Netherlands. So
it was a Duo and
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the first Gundam I saw as well. So yeah.
Yeah, that a great story. It only came by once a week, and it was and also enemies there. There was also a part where it was unclear who was a real bad guy.
Yeah.
And
was Trey's a bad guy or not?
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, okay, wait, this is a very interesting part if it comes to storytelling because it's something completely different to the Pokemon and He-Man episodes that I was watching. Even Dragon Ball Z had their bigger storylines, but usually, aside from the last episode, you'd know the heroes would win. With a lot of screaming and 3 episodes with Kamehamehas, but those don't know what would win. When it comes to D&D, you have a session that takes about 4 hours or something, and then you have to wait for new schedules to open up somewhere. So I can fully understand why some people are very happy with just running one-shots or at least some small episodic kind of adventures, just to get for like the Example League does, for example, the Adventure League.
Yes,
I can fully understand that part. So it's always again a session 0 question: what kind of game do you want? Do you want the episodic part of He-Man, or do you want the new He-Man with a very grand storyline, where you're always just guessing who's the bad, who's the good guy? Are we actually winning? Are we doing something good here, or are we the bad guys? How much depth do you want?
There you go. How much depth do you want in your game? Because I can give you as much as you want.
Yeah, exactly. For example, I run a game now, and I've really asked the players a few times now already, please get into this world. If you're only watching it from your notes and from one side, you're gonna miss a lot of this game, especially things where you get your advantage with. For example, they had to hunt some lycanthropes, and like, yeah, cool, hunt some animals, awesome. But a few sessions later, we're like, oh wait a second. Could it be that the ones that asked us to hunt all these guys, that these are the bad guys? Because these are very loving and awesome people.
Ah.
And it really messed with their heads because I had just had a few tribes over there living there, and it was a tradition from that village where they came from to hunt lycanthropes, which is a tradition.
Yeah.
If you became a man, you had to at least hunt a werewolf, else you wouldn't really be a man. So it was a very cultural thing, but the good and evil thing was very vague. Did purposely did that because just to have them open up to the world, because things can be different depending on which part you look at it from.
Oh, I
So
like
that's
that. Yeah.
always a fun thing to experiment with. But then again, your players have to be open for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it comes down what kind of game do they want.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of the kind of game, on the scale of full tactics with maps, minis, everything, all the way to the other end, which is strictly theater of the mind, what's your preference for running a game? Is it somewhere in between? How much do you go cheat, or how much do you like to go one way or the other?
As a peripheral preference, I like maps.
Yeah.
I like being able to see how big the dungeon is that we explored.
Mm-hmm.
I like to have an overview of the map, and it could be that I'm also used to playing Zelda, and I also get those maps of my dungeons.
Yep.
And for example, roleplay, I don't really need the extra building because that only is a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, as a dungeon master for others, I usually see, okay, what do they need? For kids, I always use maps.
Yeah.
But then again, I do use maps that are so ridiculously basic. They still have to use their creativity to imagine what's on the plate.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if I put a forest and a small cabin, I usually make some green fluffs. And like, that's a tree, and they really have to think, Rick, you can't really draw, so really that's a tree. And then okay, then we'll get on our way. And I know that some of my groups are very combat focused, and in every combat scenario, they really need a map. If you don't have a map, they don't feel like they can prepare themselves much. They can't get into advantageous positions. So, especially in combat, I'm used to using maps, and for new players, I also do so for exploration, just to give them a feel of how movement works, how obstacles look, and to also give some minis the time to shine.
Right.
Because even people that haven't played already have that 3D mini at home, and like, this is my hero, I want to play him. Who am I to say no?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I started when I was running the game. It was for two friends from college and their two kids, and we were playing remotely at first, and the kids, when I threw a map up on the screen and let them draw on it, they started doing much better with it. And then so when we finally played in person for the first time, I actually built a very crude version of the Goblin Hideout from the Mines of Phandelver.
Oh, the Cragmaw.
Yeah, and I built that. Yeah, I built the Cragmaw hideout in 3 dimensions out of foam core, and had them play, and they loved it. And then to the point where they were fighting the goblins out front, the two the two sentries. The one started. The one kid, he had his character start running into the dungeon because I want to see what's in there, and it ended up with one of the characters being knocked unconscious because there weren't enough people fighting the goblins. But I found that with the kids, it definitely got their attention a lot more to have that 3-dimensional experience to play with.
But also, let's be honest, kids nowadays, and I'm really trying to make sure that my son has a different approach. Whenever you turn on a screen, you see everything you need to know.
Yep.
If, for example, read a book, you still have to imagine things yourselves. And even I am from a generation that lost a lot of that imagination power. So especially also when I'm trying to, for example, for the schools, for example, if I'm trying to get new kids to sign up for my after-school program, I bring maps, I bring dragons, I bring everything that I've got.
Yeah.
I will also work up to that if they start playing. They also help me with, for example, creating dungeons, for example. Then we're going to create a lot of small rocks or trees or other terrain elements, so we can build out our own maps as we play. But it's a very important part, especially nowadays, that people are kind of expecting that you'll fly out the dungeon for them. The same goes for virtual maps. I have a TV on a stand that I sometimes use just to have them as a digital map. And some players absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Me personally, I hate it. But then again, I am graphically one of the worst people you'll ever see. So also creating those maps, when I do so, the the first thing you'll do is laugh, and that's perfectly fine because that's really I understand that. I understand that fully. I can't draw and I can't do it digitally yet, so but it really does add, especially for a lot of people nowadays.
Yeah.
Especially if you look at some companies that are creating 3D terrain.
Yeah.
They're not expensive anymore, so that helps. A few old Warhammer buddies really have thousands of euros on terrain that they could now get for a few $100.
Oh man. Yeah.
I'm trying not to rub that in a lot of their faces, but they know it's true. But it does help that accessibility is a lot higher than it was before.
Yeah.
That you can really easily build and show. Because I do understand that a lot of old games, especially when I revisit old campaign books, for example, I don't get Thack Zero or Thaco, the armor class.
Oh, Jesus, yes.
I won't help you with that. I can't answer anything
That's
about
a special kind of hell.
Yeah, exactly. But I do understand that a lot of that gaming was built on theory of the mind, as well as very basic map drawings.
Yeah.
Because of a very different time, because this was early 80s, if I'm correct. 84 was the first D&D game, if I remember correctly.
So first edition actually came out in the 70s.
Oh, 70s.
Second edition was the early 80s, and I forget, because I think there was like second edition, and then at some point they split it out into the red box and the blue box.
True, yeah.
So I started with red box, and then obviously that only took you up to like level 3 or 4. And then if you wanted to go beyond that, then you went to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. You went to AD&D, and that was the blue box. And that was when they started introducing like hex maps for outdoors and all the other stuff. And you know, and it's really a lot of tables. For better, for worse, there were a lot of tables. I miss the treasure tables. I will say that it used to be as part of a monster's stats. It had treasure type.
Yeah.
And you would go to that table and you would roll, and it would tell you exactly, it would randomize, but tell you exactly how much of anything you would find in that monster's lair, or on that monster's person. And I do miss that, but there was also a lot. 3.5 obviously went to the extreme, but it started, But I never seen a first edition, but I understand first edition was very unwieldy because it was the adaptation from wargaming to D&D. So there was a lot like character creation was a pretty archaic process. You needed someone to help translate. You needed someone to take you through that. You needed someone to help you with that. It was a process, I'm sorry.
Times have changed.
Yes, they have. Yeah, with 3D printing and the access to printers. I love drawing maps. I recently, in the last couple of months, started getting into crafting terrain, and so I'm going down a dark hole, I think.
I have one YouTube account that I'm plowing through it, and I'm really trying to build as many things as he puts up. Not sure if you want a lot of names in this.
No, go for it. Go for it.
It's the DMG, and there's also a website dmg.info, and he made basically very cheap terrain pieces. And he does so with a lot of flair and happiness and fun.
Mm-hmm. I think I've seen some of his stuff.
Now, everyone the glue gun he makes, but the most fun part that I saw a while back was his pizza box terrain.
Pizza box terrain? Oh, I'm going to look that up. That's cool.
He took pizza boxes and he got the unused ones for else you will get a lot of weird smells. But he also used it to create levels. So, for example, if you have a hole in the ground, you could easily make that hole because you still have a second. You have a second base in your in your game.
Oh, I like that.
That was amazing.
Yeah. So I've been watching Black Magic Craft.
Oh yeah.
And he's
One of
got
his inspirations.
He's got some. His tutorials have been fantastic. So I've been using his methods for doing like the walls and everything, and he's had some. He's got some really fun stuff as well. So, there's a lot of great information out there.
Yeah,
So
a lot of people have done amazing stuff, built amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just really awesome to see what you can do with a lot of let's be honest, not very much stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the foam core, I mean the foam itself is not expensive, and the paints, I mean if you're I mean, listen, you can get as much paint as you want, but for terrain you don't need to get like Reaper, you don't need to get the miniature paints. So you're getting stuff for like here it's like 79 cents for a bottle. It's going to last you a while. And yeah, I mean, and the only thing that's limiting you is the skill. And I know that I'm still very, very at the beginning of it. And I kind of like what's been turning out. And it has not been expensive. As much as I love Dwarven Forged, I can't justify dropping that kind of money. So
exactly. Even when you put in the shipping for you're still at the same continent.
Yeah.
If I need to get that delivered.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
possible.
and you're mainland. I mean, I have a friend. One of the guys in my group, he lives in Florida now, here in the States, but he grew up in Iceland. So, everything was expensive.
Yeah.
And it was. I think I remember he was told stories about about the books getting over there, but it was so expensive even just to get the books because, it's Iceland. It's an island. Everything had to be flown or shipped there. It wasn't, there was no economy of scale for that kind of thing. So
yeah, and that's why we have D&D Beyond.
Yes,
but still not as much fun as paper. Have to be honest.
I agree.
I am a paper kind of DM.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if you have any other preference, but I screens distract me.
Yeah, I was building a tool for my game. I started teaching myself coding last year. So I was coding something in Unity, and the Unity engine for my game with my homebrew game for them to keep track of their character sheets, and I could keep track of it as well. Because they always, even though we had everything on Google Drive, they kept on seeming to lose them. And you forget where you stored it and all that. So I put that on there, and I used D&D Beyond as a template for how maybe things should look. And I made a character on there, and it just wasn't as satisfying as having that piece of paper, that blank piece of paper, rolling the dice, filling everything out. I need to. I might eventually transfer it to a digital format, but I need to start pencil to paper, pen to paper. I need to. Yeah. There's something very visceral about that. It just. Yeah. I agree.
If I still have my first character sheet, I still have that one, and I've
really.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's one of my prized possessions. My level 6 Cleric of Morden in 3rd edition. But if I also just see how many times I've been working with an eraser to adjust my HP, and how thin that paper has gotten over there, or some stains from some soda thingy that somebody spilled over the table, it's just nostalgic in that regard.
Yeah.
So it's also just me becoming older, I think. So it's just like, Rick, you're old, you like paper. Yeah, sure, I can live with that.
I think it's what you came up with, too. I think people that if they're just getting into the game... So the players that I was with a couple weeks ago, one of them, again, they had no exposure to D&D prior to this. He brought up he went and downloaded the D&D Beyond app. Now, he's about the same age as me, within about 10 years or so. So it's not like he's, he's not like early 20s or teens or anything like that. But for him, he had no other exposure, and this made sense to him. But yeah, I think if you came up with, you came up where computers weren't ubiquitous, the same with me. They were around, but they weren't the norm. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So what do you do when your players do something completely unexpected and unplanned? We had talked about that before. But I mean, like, when you're faced with that moment where internally you might be panicking because they did something so batshit insane that it's like, and it's completely throwing everything you had planned, thought about, dreamt of out of whack. What do you do as a DM to make that look as smooth as possible? Because we've always said part of the DM skill set is the poker face, to almost never let them see you bleed, right? You have to make it always seem like this is I've planned for this. I'm ready for you. Even though inside you're going, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. What do you do in those situations?